You're listening to an exclusive episode of the NK News podcast, available only to subscribers. You can listen to this and other episodes from your preferred podcast player by accessing the private podcast feed. For more detailed instructions, please see the step-by-step guide on the NK News website at nknews.org/private-feed. Hello, listeners, and welcome to the NK News podcast. I'm your host, Jacko's Wetsuit, and this episode is being recorded via StreamYard on the evening of Thursday, the 14th of August, 2025. And I'm joined here by Dr. Joseph Torigian, who is the author of a new book, The Party's Interests Come First. Now, at just over 700 pages, it is a deeply researched political biography of Xi Zhongxun, the father of China's current leader, Xi Jinping. And today we'll be talking about Xi Sr.'s delicate diplomacy with North Korea in the 1980s. And you'll find a more fuller bio of Dr. Torigian and his three hats in the show notes. Welcome on the show, Dr. Torigian.
Thank you so much, Jacko. I've really been looking forward to this podcast.
So, Joe, this is the story of two revolutions, the Chinese and the North Korean, that took two radically different paths. One eventually turned towards markets and economic opening, and the other stayed pretty much frozen in time. But in the early 1980s, we had Xi Zhongxun, the father of China's current leader, traveling to North Korea, praising its discipline, but also nudging it to reform. How did this moment come about, and what was really at stake?
So in the 1980s, the father of Xi Jinping, Xi Zhongxun, had a special role at the Secretariat that included managing Beijing's relations with foreign leftist, revolutionary, and communist parties. And that was a very interesting moment for him to be doing that. It was a moment when Beijing was trying to reestablish its relations with those parties that had ended during the Cultural Revolution because of the radicalism in Chinese foreign policy. In fact, relations between Beijing and Pyongyang also had become very fraught. There were some incidents on the border. Language by Chinese diplomats suggested that Kim Il-sung was a revisionist. Kim Il-sung was afraid that the Chinese would do something even more dangerous. He said that we can expect anything from them in conversations with the Soviets. And so there is this process of rebuilding in the 1980s that also was shaped by two other factors. One was China's move into a new direction economically, and that led to concerns in Pyongyang that the Chinese Communist Party was going to become revisionist, but also the North Koreans were trying to figure out the succession, and they wanted to make sure that Beijing was on board with keeping it within the family.
Okay, so what was Xi Zhongxun's role and standing in the Chinese Communist Party in the 1980s when he was most active in foreign affairs? And why was he chosen for this role?
So I would say that he was at the bottom of the top, right? So he wasn't quite as old as the senior revolutionaries like Deng Xiaoping and Chen Yun, but he was older than the new guard, figures like Hu Yaobang and Zhao Ziyang. And there had been rumors actually that Xi Zhongxun would be the general secretary, and he said privately that he thought that he could have been it. But instead, what Deng Xiaoping decided to do was use him in a way that allowed Xi Zhongxun to apply his skills, but not be given so much power that it would be problematic in a way that Deng might fear, because Deng and Xi had somewhat of a difficult relationship historically, right? And so Xi Jinping was a guy within the party that was seen as really good at managing people. He was kind of a people person, right? So that meant he also was deeply involved in the United Front within China. So he was constantly talking to the parties that the CCP allowed to exist even after 1949. He had a special role managing relations with the Dalai Lama and Tibetans and Uyghurs. And so his task trying to get even keel in the relationship with North Korea was part of that, right? So he was pretty senior and he was good with people. So in that sense, it made sense that he would be put into this particular position.
Okay, so generally speaking, and also specifically in his role with in talking to North Korea, did he have genuine decision-making power, or was he more of a trusted envoy?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So in the Chinese Communist Party, you have a very, very leader-friendly system, very leader-friendly. And so Deng Xiaoping was the person who made all of the decisions unambiguously.
Hmm.
And Hu Yaobang, who was the general secretary and led the secretariat, which is where Xi Jinping was working, he kept getting in trouble over and over because even though he understood how limited his space was for making decisions, he still stepped on Deng's toes, including on North Korea. Deng Xiaoping thought that Hu Yaobang sometimes catered too much to the North Koreans. Nevertheless, the reason you should still read my book is because in the CCP, the politics of the deputies who had to execute the policy set by the top leader, they found a very difficult environment, maybe even a nightmarish political environment, right? Because the top leader still needed to delegate, and their views still needed to be turned into concrete decision making, right?
Hmm.
And so that's why the deputies kept getting in trouble is they were never quite sure how much space they had, even though they knew that it was limited, and they were never quite
Hmm.
sure just exactly how to implement the decisions of the top leader. And also, as I said, Xi Jinping was someone who was pretty good at managing people. He was charismatic. And so that skill was not common within the elite, right? So in the Chinese Communist Party, you had a system where people who had fought the revolution and who'd gone through a lot of horrific experiences, they had a lot of confidence in themselves. They were sometimes difficult people.
Hmm.
They would think to themselves, well, why should we listen to the North Koreans or why should we listen to the Tibetans? And so
Right.
Xi Jinping was tough. He said you couldn't have a united front without principles. But at the very least, he was somebody who could be charming and smiling when he wanted to.
Okay, so we're setting the scene a little bit here. So we're in the early 1980s. We're what, less than 10, more than 5 years, but less than 10 from the end of the Cultural Revolution in China. You've mentioned that the relationship between Beijing and Pyongyang was pretty fraught, and you've already hinted at some tension between Hu Yaobang and Deng Xiaoping over how warm Beijing should be towards Pyongyang. So could you tell us a little bit more before this visit that we're about to talk about?
Right. So the Cultural Revolution concludes, and now China has to figure out how they are going to save the revolution after nearly destroying the country. And so Deng Xiaoping and other leaders decide that they need to think much more about economic growth. And so we see decisions like the special economic zones, we see more rights going to the peasants, but we also see in China some interesting moments in succession politics, right? So the initial leader in China after Mao's death was a man named Hua Guofeng, and Deng pushed him out. And we
Mm,
know that communist regimes are constantly keeping an eye on each other and learning lessons from each other. And
hmm.
so, on one trip to China, Kim Il sung asked Deng Xiaoping a lot of questions about Hua Guofeng. And that's not surprising, right? Because I'm sure that Kim was thinking to himself, well, how can I prevent in my country what happened within China?
Yeah.
And he had seen other things too, right? So he had seen Lin Biao, the defense minister, a very close associate of Mao Zedong, try to flee to the Soviet Union and die in the process. And so
Hmm.
Kim might have learned certain lessons from that about how hard it is even to trust people who had fought a war with you, right?
Right.
And so when the senior Kim goes to China, he's interested in a lot of things, right? He's trying to figure out whether the Chinese are going revisionist, which
Hmm.
is of course communist jargon for whether you're going to stay loyal to the revolutionary line. He's trying to figure out what's going on with succession politics in China and what it might mean for him. And he also wants to bring the Chinese around to his own solution to the succession problem, which is to hand power over to his own son. And of course,
Right.
the Chinese, they want certain things from the North Koreans too, right? So the Chinese understand that this new path that they're taking makes them vulnerable to charges that they're not really communists anymore. And the
Hmm.
North Koreans really take that kind of this kind of thing seriously. So they wanted to win from Kim this an affirmation that the Chinese path is legitimate, but they also want the North Koreans to think about their own economic trajectory. They also are hoping that the North Koreans will pursue a path that makes them resilient economically. And finally, of course, they don't want the North Koreans to start a war because
Right.
the Chinese think that they need a peaceful environment for their rise.
In your research, did you get an impression of what Xi Zhongxun thought of Kim Il Sung before he actually met him?
So they had met in the 1950s.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't really a sort of meaningful get to know you type conversation because at the time Xi Jinping was involved in foreign policy. He was CC'd on foreign policy documents. He was the right-hand man to Zhou Enlai, who of course was very prominent in the China-North Korean relationship. And so when he met Kim Il Sung, they actually mentioned that they had seen each other, right? Although it's not
Hmm.
exactly clear whether they had had. I doubt they would have had a heart-to-heart during that period.
Right.
Xi Jinping wasn't quite senior enough, and but they would have had a lot to talk about. Kim Il Sung was only 1 year older
Ah.
than Xi Jinping. It's interesting too, when they met in Pyongyang, Xi Jinping wasn't someone who typically talked a lot about how much he suffered during the Cultural Revolution, but Kim Il Sung pressed him on it, and Xi Jinping opened up a little bit. And in fact, when you read the official biography of Xi Jinping that was published within China,
Hmm.
a lot of the material they use about Xi Jinping's experiences during the Cultural Revolution were drawn from the transcript of his conversation with Kim Il Sung, right?
That's very interesting. Oh, yeah. So how was it that Kim was able to get Xi to open up when he normally wouldn't? Curious to hear the rest? Become an NK News subscriber today for access to the full episode. Head to nknews.org/join for more information. If you're already a subscriber to NK News, you can listen to full episodes from your preferred podcast player by accessing the private podcast feed. For more detailed instructions, please see the step-by-step guide on the NK News website at nknews.org/private-feed.